Good morning, Tish. Thanks so much for that kind introduction. And Robert, thank you so much for the invitation to be able to speak today. SOUTHCOM is fortunate to have such a great partner in NGA. You are one of the great innovators inside of our government, challenging the U.S. military and the intelligence community to use GEOINT in new and exciting ways. We can't thank you enough for the support that you give to USSOUTHCOM, and frankly, we're delighted to be part of the NGA team. Now, Robert asked me to talk about how we are embracing innovation at SOUTHCOM. So I'm going to hazard a guess that some of you may not know too much about us. SOCOM, sure, everybody knows those guys. That's where you go when you've got the easy problems. But SOUTHCOM, what on earth could we have to say about emerging threats? Well, plenty as it turns out, but we'll get to that in a minute. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, here's a quick overview of what we do. As one of 6 geographic combatant commands, our job is to look south, to focus on the Americas, 1/6 of the globe, 15 million square miles, with more than 500 million people in 31 countries. Now, with an already crowded national security agenda to our east and to our west, it's easy to lose sight of the enormous strategic importance of the Americas to our national interests. Fact is, in terms of proximity, trade, immigration, and the environment, I would propose that no other part of the world has a greater impact on our daily life than the Americas. Now, when people ask me to describe what it's like working in this part of the world, I always find myself saying, it's different down here. One of the ways it's different is that we don't see any traditional military threats. No conflicts between countries, no regional adversaries, no strategic military threat to the United States. In fact, we've got a host of willing, capable partners who are eager to work with us and with each other. You may be surprised to learn that nations like Brazil, Chile, and Colombia boast military capabilities on par with many of our NATO allies. Now, these are nations that are actively contributing to international security, not just in Latin America, but around the globe. All things considered, this is a pretty great place to work. Now, while the region may be largely at peace, that doesn't mean that it's free from security challenges. But, like I just said, it's different down here. And that extends to the type of security challenges we and our partners face. Over the past decade or so, the nature of many of these challenges has changed. Old ones have evolved, and new ones have emerged, both with direct implications for our national interests. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Change. How the regional security environment has changed, and how that's driving us to change how we look at operational innovation at SOUTHCOM. As General Dunford and others have noted, the global security environment our military faces is unlike any that we have ever seen before. It's more complex, more uncertain, and more volatile. It's an environment we know more about, but seeing the signal through the noise and knowing what to do with it is a challenge in and of itself. The environment is also more interconnected. Everywhere that we look, we see a merging of the global and the local, a blurring between crime and acts of terror, and overlaps between public security and national defense. And everywhere we look, we see networks. We live in a world that's driven by them. Networks are the defining characteristic of our daily lives, and they're all around us. We rely on them. We're part of them. And, unfortunately, we're also threatened by them. What's true for the global security environment is true for Latin America, where groups like drug traffickers have long been the principal challenge to regional security. But thanks to globalization, the nature of these groups and of other networks like them is changing. What were once public safety nuisances have in some cases become globally integrated enterprises that fuel corruption, chaos, and criminality. These groups are no longer small-time criminals and jihadi wannabes, confined to one bad neighborhood or one vulnerable community. Many have global reach and the profits that go along with it. Thanks to those profits, some networks possess military-grade capabilities that rival or even exceed those of our partners. ISIS leverages social media to market their brand to new audiences, while transnational criminal organizations exploit the cyber realm in new and unconventional ways. The Sinaloa cartel are market makers, fielding new product lines like synthetic drugs and finding new and incredibly creative ways to move things in and out of our homeland. Like companies on the cutting edge of R&D, these groups embrace new technology like semi-submersibles, crypto coin, and tracking devices on their products to stay one step ahead of our efforts to counter them. The tactics, techniques, and procedures employed by these networks have advanced far beyond the typical activities we'd expect of violent non-state actors. Everything is more complex and more dynamic. They don't operate in just one domain, at one point in time, or do just one thing in one place. They simultaneously operate across multiple domains, countries, regions, and continents. They're adaptive, constantly reacting and learning from other networks and from us. Every obstacle that we place in their path, everything that we do or don't do, every action that we take, it all affects them in interconnected and interdependent ways that are difficult to predict and often impossible to fully understand. Keeping pace with the changing nature of these networks requires some fundamental changes on our part. We need to think and to act differently, not just about these networks, but also about how we use information, how we get it, how we share it with our partners, and how we act on it together as our own friendly network. At SOUTHCOM, we have several added complications. We don't have the luxury of significant resources to help us get after these challenges. That means that we need to get a lot smarter about making the best use of what we do have. And whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, we also face competition for regional security partnerships, specifically from Russia and China, who actively court the region through arms sales, defense agreements, and military education exchanges. They're also actively engaged in information operations in the open source domain. This is why operational innovation is so important to us. It's how we gain a competitive edge against adversaries, and it's also how we maintain our competitive edge as a military partner. At US Southcom, we're embracing operational innovation in several different ways. One of our most exciting partnerships, obviously, is the work that we're doing with NGA. Now, this started out as an experimental collaboration with NGA's Pathfinder 2 effort and commercial small satellite providers. The results were so impressive, we created a pilot project to operationalize the R&D results. The goal of this project is to help us visualize and to understand the complex dynamics of the regional security environment. To do that, we are combining commercially available imagery with online tools and publicly available data. This combination gives us insights into people-to-people connections, allowing us to see not just what's happening, but where, and most importantly, when. Gaining critical context in both time and in space. We've leveraged geo-enabled open source analysis in multiple ways. We used it to pinpoint illicit airfields that were being used to smuggle drugs from South America into Honduras. We analyzed prison capacity in El Salvador and verified the status of construction on new prison projects using nothing more than press reporting and social media postings about gang roundups. And we uncovered evidence of illicit networks engaging in illegal mining in Peru just by comparing commercial imagery. Now, we think we can do the same in Central America, where illicit networks may be responsible for 30% of the deforestation happening in Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras. This unclassified capability really proved itself during last year's hurricane relief efforts in Haiti. Using commercial imagery, photos from Twitter, and postings from other social media sites, our team was able to rapidly identify washed out bridges and damaged infrastructure faster than we could get the information from our own assets due to the days of cloud cover that typically follow a storm. This helped us because it enhanced our internal planning efforts for aid delivery. More importantly, though, it helped the United Nations and foreign partners prioritize repair and recovery efforts. Now, what's great about this new application of existing technology is that it gets us outside the typical intelligence tasking cycle. It makes us more agile and more responsive. It's also affordable, and more importantly, it's accessible to everyone. It's also unclassified. We can share it with our foreign military partners. They can share it with their civilian agencies, NGOs, and other organizations on the ground. Now, like Robert, we think that working and succeeding in the open is really the next frontier in GEOINT. Working in the open supports the development of our own military capabilities and also strengthens our network of military and security partners. By sharing more with our partners, we can do more, and they can do more in turn with us and with each other. We are better partners. We have a stronger partnership because of this. But how we use the technology is just as important as what technology we use. We're moving out aggressively to embrace operational innovation in traditional mission sets, like the detection and monitoring of illegal drugs. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this aspect of the Department of Defense, since 1989, our Key West-based Joint Interagency Task Force has executed this mission, and frankly, they're pretty darn good at it. When they have planes to hunt for illicit network activity and ships to vector in for interdiction, their success rate is impressive. Problem is, there just isn't enough ISR to go around, and a lot of the Jihad of South's requirements go unmet. So we're trying to compensate for that. We're conducting a long-duration, long-dwell ISR pilot study to address our detection and monitoring capability shortfalls. During the first phase, we performed a comprehensive study that looked at more than 500 commercially available, low-cost systems to determine which could perform the best out in the Eastern Pacific, where illicit networks are extremely active. We'll soon launch the first test flight of a Stratolite, a balloon operating in the stratosphere. This capability is actually being developed for commercial near-space tourism, but we think it has some interesting applications for our mission sets, particularly if the balloons achieve their predicted flight durations of greater than 180 days. We think this has the potential to be a game changer for us, a great, long-duration, long-dwell surveillance platform. We're going to combine this high-altitude balloon with a long-duration oceanographic remote sensor and an unmanned aerial system that's used by railroad companies to conduct track inspections beyond the line of sight. Between these three capabilities, we think that we will get persistent awareness and better information sharing, all intended to produce better disruption of illicit network activity. Now, we're proud to be the first geographic combatant command to try this out. We're proud to be experimenting with technology that may mitigate our capability gaps without competing with our traditional assets or free up those exquisite assets to use where they are most urgently needed. But what we're really proud of is how we're changing our mindset. It's not just that we're leveraging off-the-shelf hardware in new ways. We're changing how we're looking at things like commercial space technology, space as a service. We're anticipating a world where the cost of sensing the environment drops by a factor of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, where bandwidth is no longer an obstacle to disseminating the real-time data and information from remote sensors, and where autonomous learning systems enable us to immediately see patterns that we otherwise couldn't. That's why we are so interested and participating with Jack Shanahan's MAVEN project. Now, we're not there yet, but it's not that far away, and the implications are enormous. So that's what we're doing. And here's what we hope that it means for all of you. That it fundamentally changes the way that you look at U.S. Southern Command and at this important part of the world. In case you didn't know, the Americas is a great place for innovators. Geographically, it's got dense jungles, harsh terrain. It has thousands of miles of riverine thoroughfares alongside rugged and often undeveloped coastlines. Diverse weather patterns, deserts, mountains, congested urban centers, and everything in between. It's home to partners like Brazil and Uruguay, who are leaning forward on the innovation front and embracing new technologies in peacekeeping, disaster response, and space. These and other innovators are natural partners for the United States. All this, and it's remarkably peaceful and welcoming of U.S. engagement. You can focus on fielding new technologies, focused on challenging and meaningful missions, and we'd like to be the platform to let you do that. We're not waiting for mature capabilities or technological nirvana. We're integrating emerging technologies into our operations now. Whatever it is, we'll try it out. We'll get it in the field, see what works, what doesn't. We've got a lot to offer: an open mind, dynamic and capable partners, geographic proximity to the United States, and a range of security challenges that demand creative and agile thinking. Remember what I said earlier. It's different down here. And different, ultimately, is what innovation is all about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kurt, very much. That was terrific. So it's different down there, huh? I'm not sure I've heard a Southcom commander say that before. But it is indeed different. It is a different AOR, and you described it very well for those who are not familiar with it. And as we chatted earlier, and I said in my opening remarks, you know, the have-not command when it comes to ISR platforms, because you're competing against CENTCOM and SOCOM and Pacific Command, where there are hostilities actually occurring. That said, your response is, it's a great place to innovate, which is what you just took us through. So you talked about some of the innovations that you're doing, and some in particular with NGA. So what's next? What's the follow-on to those initial projects?
Well, I think it follows very logically in some of the comments that Jack Shanahan made just previously, talking about how do we take these reams of data that do come in and make sense of them? How do we detect these very, very faint signals to give us some insights, given that we do not have access to the more sophisticated capabilities that come to bear? How do we leverage non-traditional means of getting after problems? So different types of collection platforms, different types of sources of information and intelligence. We are very much interested in publicly available information. When you look at Latin America, you look at a part of the world that has enormous penetration by social media. It is a very connected part of the world. That's not what we tend to think of, but when you look at the significant urbanization and the availability of social media, it is, we think it's an opportunity for us to, if we can understand it, then we can glean insights that we can use. The other piece that I think is critically important and that's different is, unlike other parts of the world where we have security challenges, the Department of Defense tends to be the 800-pound gorilla in CENTCOM or in the European Command or over in the Pacific. In SOUTHCOM, we operate as much more of equal partnership, equal partners with our interagency partners, and that means we have to be able to work together in a relationship of trust with our partners in the diplomatic community, the intelligence community, the law enforcement community especially, coming up with new ways to do business. With our international partners, you know, we don't have the luxury of being able to rely on an organization like Five Eyes to be able to share information. Yet we have partners that have every bit as much capability and interesting insights that we need to be able to share with. So we've got to make ourselves be better partners, better coalition partners, and find ways to be able to exchange information much more freely. One of the forcing functions that we're putting in place at U.S. Southern Command is we're about to bring on board a Colombian general officer. Now, he's not going to be a liaison officer stuck off in a corner. He will be one of my directors in charge of our J79, the 7-9 combined organization, responsible for interagency partnerships, responsible for helping us build out those white networks and those green networks to be able to apply greater pressure on the red threat networks. That Colombian general officer is going to hold us accountable. It'll force us to be better. That means the work that we do has to be shareable and releasable at the Columbia level.
Yeah, which is extremely important for you. It's extremely important for the whole department as we work with our allies and our partners. So, so weaving that in, along with all of the experimental technology, have you had issues in turning the experiments into programs of record, continuing, just from the whole TTP perspective, getting it into operations? And this audience in particular, the industry part of it, would be interesting in knowing, how they work with you. Do you have a particular office? How are you driving from the experimental to day-to-day operations?
Sure. So, making a virtue of the necessity that we live in, we do recognize that if we invite test and evaluation to come in and to work with us within our organization. Some of you may remember Brian Hendrickson, a Reserve SEAL Rear Admiral. Brian, we stole away from DIUX, and he now works in our headquarters. And in fact, he has just taken over responsibility to lead a combined J2, J3 network engagement team that will allow us to operationalize the information that we have. But he has been the focal point for a lot of the innovation research that we are doing within our headquarters. We would invite people to bring ideas in. I mentioned a couple of the ones that we are beginning to explore. Very, very excited about the experimental work that we did with NGA, working with Planet to be able to leverage the ready availability of significantly greater GEOINT information and coupling it with other types of information. The challenge now, as you put it, is operationalizing as it shifts from an experiment to a business model. And so, that's the other piece of the equation. If we find something that works really, really, really well, there is some risk that it'll get poached away from us by our other regional combatant commanders who have higher priority needs. So this is one of those, we want to help identify things. We want to help identify some good ideas. We would like to hang on to a couple of them, particularly since we tend to not fare very well in the normal resource prioritization.
In the normal POM process, yes. You also talked about changing the mindset. At the end of the day, there are people involved in our business. And as much as we will move towards artificial intelligence, machine learning, machine to machine, people are involved. How are you working with changing the mindset? I've also heard you talk, Kurt, on diversity of thought. So if you want to weave some of that in there also.
I think that, again, this is where one of the advantages that we enjoy by not having such an enormous military population within our headquarters or enormous military resources, we've got to come up with solutions that take advantage of the best capabilities. That forces us to build trust with our partners at state, our partners in law enforcement, and that can be challenging, our partners in the intelligence community, because at the end of the day, we are all tribal, and we are products of the tribes that we come from. And I grew up in a world that was inherently part of that Navy tribe, but even within that, the destroyer-driving Navy tribe. We can't solve our problems if we stay within our service tribe, if we stay within our department tribe, if we even stay within our national tribe. We've got to build bridges. And so that requires us to get out there and I think take a leaf from the book of our friends in the Army Special Forces community. You got to learn how to go in and sit down and drink tea with the local tribal elders and earn their trust and confidence. And that means find out, how can we help? What are the capabilities that we bring? When we look at the security threats that come from through our part of the world, for far too long we looked at it as a commodities-based security threat, and so we tended to focus exclusively on a single illicit commodity. The reality is the threat comes from the networks, and it's from these threat networks and the interconnected nature of these threat networks. And so we have got to be able to better see them, better understand them. In the lexicon of how you take on a network, there is the detection, the illumination, and ultimately the disruption piece. Now, in other parts of the world, the disruption piece, there is a military component, a very, very important military component. In our world, in our region, that disruption piece is almost always a judicial in-state type of a disruption. It ideally will be partner nation law enforcement where they have the capability and the capacity. It might be partner nation military if they've been charged by their governments to support their law enforcement. It may be U.S. federal law enforcement that has the responsibility. We're great with that. We're okay with that. We don't need to own that piece. In fact, what we want to do is be a better partner to enable it. So we think we've got significant capabilities to contribute in the network detection and the illumination piece, build that information, and then pass it off to other members of our friendly network to be able to do the disruption. That's where we think we can contribute.
Terrific. So what are the partner nations contributing as far as the first two pieces of that? Where are they in their innovation also?
No great surprise. Some countries have significant technological capabilities. Brazil is probably the classic case in point. One of the challenges that presented by this enormous compromise of trust represented by Snowden was we stopped talking to each other, and it became very difficult for us to be able to work together. With the significant preparations that Brazil was making as they prepared for the World Cup and then for the significant responsibilities of hosting an international event like the Olympics, the door was open and we were again able to spend some time talking and sharing ideas. Brazil did a terrific job. They were able to marshal together contributions made by many different countries, different departments and agencies to knit together a security framework that provided for a superb Olympics. And so that has led to opportunities for us to continue to keep those doors open, continue to share ideas and information. Brazil has been a world leader in peacekeeping operations, have tremendous insights to understand how you go in and work in an environment like that, how you build trust in populations that you're charged with going in and trying to establish and maintain peace. One of the things, frankly, that we have learned from working with our partners in Brazil, Uruguay, who is another peacekeeping leader, Chile, is how do we take best advantage of all of the resources available to us? And frankly, to us in the military, that means how do we appropriately integrate women into our military forces to be able to take advantage of the different contributions that they are able to make. They have problem-solving skills that are significantly different. They have different ways of looking at issues. They give us a competitive advantage. It's up to us to figure out how to create an environment where men and women are able to work side by side in an environment as complete teammates. So we've learned that. We're taking that one on. That's one of our critical military imperatives, is to build more effective teams.
And I know that you do a lot of speaking on that with your partner nation military counterparts also. So thank you for that. Again, our industry component of the audience, they would probably like to hear, so you gave some examples again of some of the projects that you're working on. What are some of your challenges that remain? What are some of the really hard problems? And it's different down there. You've got some very different problems that we don't necessarily think about because we're focused on the traditional military, traditional military issues. So how can we help?
Well, it's, when you recognize that in many instances your adversaries are far better resourced because of the money generating capabilities that trafficking and illicit substances.
Activities, absolutely.
They often are able to go in. They frequently will be early adopters of some new technology. And so that's one of the issues that we find. We need to be on the cutting edge of understanding what some of these new capabilities are that are out there so we can keep pace with them. And that's where, for those of you who are not familiar with our small interagency task force in Key West at GEOINT South, is they really are doing leading edge work, bringing together folks who understand what some of these new capabilities are, how we can harness technology to be able to give us a better opportunity to compete with these adversaries, recognizing that the adversaries have nothing but money to be able to throw at the problem. The other piece is to recognize that the true innovation is going to come from industry. It's, that's long been recognized. How are we able to be a more effective business-like partner, trusted business-like partner from industry as we work together, recognizing all of the challenges that we have had and that successive service secretaries and secretaries of defense have tried to address this acquisition reform issues, and it continues to be a very, very difficult challenge. But the willingness of industry to work with us, and particularly industry that are beginning to identify some new cutting edge areas, and they're looking for some ways to test it out. That's where we think we can probably partner effectively.
Help there with the testing, and I think everyone's gotten that message that they're invited down.
Try it here first is our motto.
Try it here first. So you just mentioned acquisition. I guess we'll also see how this reorganization within AT&L helps with acquisition reform. But speaking about OSD, you did mention that you really want to partner with General Shanahan and Project Maven. Are there any concrete ideas or any plans at this point that you can share with us?
We're already a part of that consortium that he talked about. He mentioned that how the services and the combatant commanders participate, and that's where we are part of that team. Part of our intelligence organization has been working with them very, very actively.
Terrific. Thank you. While I take a look at these, what keeps you up at night? That's always a good question.
Yeah, no, that's honestly, it really is. It's not the number of kilos of cocaine that moves north. It's the networks themselves, and it's the progressive, interconnected nature of networks that we are beginning to see. For a long time, there was a bit of a preconceived notion that economically based networks, criminal networks, and ideologically based terrorist networks would never commingle, that it was bad for business if you were a criminal organization, and it was bad for ideological purity if you were a terrorist. And the reality that we are finding is the lines have blurred completely. And while they may not necessarily wittingly work together, oftentimes they occupy that same gray zone of the money launderers and the document forgers and the corrupt government officials to exploit them as a means for them to pursue their ends. So we see that, and then there have been long-standing cases of organizations, terrorist groups like Hezbollah, that have been engaged in our region in criminal activities to fund the sorts of activities that they engage in other parts of the world. So it's this commingling and the need for us to stop trying to create I guess a cylinder that where we've got counter-narcotics funding and authorities that are completely isolated from counterterrorism funding and authorities that are isolated from transnational criminal organization funding and authorities. From our perspective, they're all networks, and let's pursue them as networks, and then we can sort out as we go along the ultimate provenance and ensure that we've got the right authorities. But by building a better blue network that we have that takes advantage of military, law enforcement, intelligence, diplomatic, we've got in the room all the authorities that we need. We've just got to be able to blend them together and use them appropriately.
And I think that's a good way to think about it. So, you talked about, again, the experiments with NGA and with Planet, and then also the balloon that you're working. So if you're going to have all of this imagery, all of the time, that's a real paradigm shift, not only from the amount of information, but also from the whole tasking part of that. How do you see that kind of changing things for you?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt we have to be able to take advantage of all the lessons that have been learned in other theaters that have, for a long time, had a ready access to more data and probably not enough PED, not enough analysts. There's no such thing as having too many analysts, but we are a little bit in the opposite direction for right now. Now that's going to change, I hope, as we begin to see more coming in. But we have significant analytical capability that we need to make sure we are fully tasking, making best use of what you need the humans to do, and then as you heard Jack talk about, how we can get the machines to do those things that the machines can do best, because we've got, I think, a significant depth of people with area and regional expertise that we are prepared to unleash on it as long as we don't have them doing, that kind of the mechanical work that doesn't take advantage of their area expertise. So we need that analytics to be done on the front end, and then our human analysts to be able to work it and pluck out those weak signals out of the background.
Absolutely, and you've got a little bit different terrain, if you will, than parts of the world that we have spent a lot of time in, for the last approaching 2 decades now. If you think about the canopy, if you think about what we've been working on for years now from a foliage penetration standpoint, right. How's that going? And is that operationalized, or can you talk to what's going on in the S&T
Sure.
or R&D arena?
Yeah, it's, I would say it's still is very much small in scale. There are some exquisite capabilities that are developmental, but they are not agile, they are not fast, they are not tactical. We've come to expect as operators that we will have this exquisite full motion video and being able to stare at a particular location or an individual for hours or days on end. And I would just ask us, think about how that allows us to apply very, very narrowly drawn rules of engagement to ensure that when it comes time to conduct a kinetic activity, for instance, we've got the greatest likelihood of knowing what we're hitting and that we're not hitting, that what we don't want to hit. It's never perfect, but it's the highest degree that we've ever had at any time in history. Now, ask yourself, how would you do that under triple canopy jungle? How would you maintain that degree of exquisite situational awareness to make sure, again, if you're trying to follow a particular target, that you're following exactly the one that you think you're following? Mm-hmm. It's a different problem set, and we're not there yet, and that's an area that I think we need to both improve the what we can see, and then dramatically improve the agility and the ability to use it in a tactical sense, as opposed to a well after the fact, non-real-time analytical sense.
Okay, so improve what we can see, understanding what that means, and then the application of it.
Right.
Very good. Okay, here's a little bit different question for you. New administration, new president, new Secretary of Defense. Has anything changed for you from a what are you focusing on perspective, or even just the guidance that you've received?
In real terms, no. What it has done, as you take a look at the individuals that are now in positions of responsibility that USSOUTHCOM traditionally has worked with in the past, obviously having a Secretary of Defense who is a former combatant commander himself, there is a much greater just understanding of what we are concerned about. Where we find ourselves enormously advantaged is the other department that SOUTHCOM traditionally works with most closely, Department of Homeland Security. We now have a Secretary of Homeland Security who was my predecessor at USSOUTHCOM. He's got a pretty good idea of the challenges of that region, and so we have a natural partnership. As I also like to point out, the relationship between SOUTHCOM and the U.S. Coast Guard is longstanding, regardless of the department that the Coast Guard has belonged to. And so, as I point out, because of higher priority national requirements in other parts of the world, my maritime force all has white hulls and orange stripes, and it's the United States Coast Guard that provides the far and away the preponderance of maritime forces throughout our region. So we've always had I think a close working relationship with DHS, but now having a Secretary of DHS who truly understands the interconnected nature of these networks and how the power that comes from leveraging a close partnership between military and law enforcement and intelligence, I think it's a unique opportunity, and it's up to us to take best advantage of it.
Absolutely. And he's probably pretty busy that you don't get a whole lot of advice. So having had former bosses who had my former jobs, I know how that can be.
I'm sure Bob never has that problem.
Yeah. I'd just like to give you the last couple of minutes if there's anything else you'd like to say to the audience.
I think I would just reiterate the point. When you think of Latin America and the Caribbean, recognize the opportunities that are presented down there. It's, one of the greatest misfortunes I think that we have is the popularity now of shows, Netflix, Narcos, because it makes people think that's what South America is all about today. Yes, there are security challenges down there, but it is a fundamentally transformed world from what it was 20 years ago. Our relationship with countries like Colombia and Brazil and Chile is fundamentally different. It is a region of the world in which we share an enormous cultural heritage. We share an appreciation for the values that drive our country and drive Latin America. And the piece that we don't recognize often enough, the militaries of many of the countries, most of the countries, in fact, of Latin America and the Caribbean, trained in the United States. They go to our war colleges, they attend our service schools, they understand who we are and how we do business. Basically, we are pushing on an open door, and it's up to us to find ways to be a better, more trusted partner. It's up to us to counteract this narrative that some from outside our region are peddling, that the United States is not a reliable partner, that we are withdrawing from the region. Nothing could be further from the truth. We've got to find creative ways to manifest that.
Yeah, and I know that Robert and NGA work very closely with their counterparts also, specifically in the GEOINT arena and in both the mapping and the imagery sides of things. So thank you so much. We very much appreciate you coming. I think you have illuminated this audience. If they weren't already familiar with Southern Command, they certainly are now.
Thanks very much.
And Admiral, thank you for your service.
Appreciate it.
Very good to see you again.
Thanks.